Now, in the election of 1848, both sides began wanting popular sovereignty, which basically was going to let the territories decide whether they're going to be free or slave. So kicking the can away from Congress, not even further down the road. And if you want to know more about popular sovereignty, there you go. So soon, other territories began applying for statehood. So the question comes up again, and part of the problem was the numbers of people in Congress. They did not want it to be unequal on either side. And talk of secession began to come if agitation of slavery continued. So the Senate used the Compromise of 1850 to continue to push off the slavery issue. It included admitting California as a free state. It allowed slavery in Washington, D.C. without the trading of slaves. But the one that's really going to make a lot of people mad is it imposes stricter fugitive slave laws, which meant you had to, by law, return fugitive slaves. And there's the Compromise of 1850. Now, the Compromise of 1850 enraged many Northerners because it included the Fugitive Slave Act, which required its citizens to catch and return runaway slaves. So by law, you had to return a runaway slave. Northern states are also offended by what they thought was an increasing intervention in the affairs of states. Northern states passed personal liberty laws, which nullified many of the fugitive slave laws. Harriet Tubman helped slaves escape through a network of houses and hiding places called the Underground Railroad. So she was one of the main leaders behind the Underground Railroad. And if you want to know more about Harriet Tubman, there you go. There you go. Now, Harriet Beecher Stowe publishes a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which condemns slavery by telling about the lives of slaves. And if you want to know more about Harriet Beecher Stowe, there you go. If you want to know more about Uncle Tom's Cabin, there's the Spark Notes for Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, in 1854, slavery came to the forefront once again with the Nebraska Territory and the Ostend Manifesto. Now, the Ostend Manifesto was a proposed plan to purchase Cuba from Spain in order to create a slave state. Obviously, this was going to be an issue in Congress. If Spain refused, the U.S. would declare war. It obviously never passes because of the lots of opposition towards it. And if you want to read more about the Ostend Manifesto, it's over there. Now, to appease the South, Congress agrees to split Nebraska into actually two territories. They create Kansas, and they left the slave-free decision in Kansas up to popular sovereignty. So there was Nebraska and Kansas decided the slavery question through popular sovereignty. So, of course, both slavery and anti-slavery settlers moved into Kansas, with the Ostend Manifesto becoming the rallying cry for the anti-slavery settlers in Kansas. So now you're basically going to have a civil war. On May 21st, 1856, slavery forces raid, pillage, and burn an anti-slavery town. So, of course, the crazy man, John Brown, carries out midnight executions of pro-slavery settlers in retaliation. And throughout 1856, violent outbreaks occurred all over Kansas. Over the next several years, the question of how to admit Kansas baffled leaders, and it sparks violence. It even spills over into the Senate, when Brooks of South Carolina beat Sumner of Massachusetts over the head with a cane because he was delivering an anti-slavery speech on the Senate floor. And if you want to know more about Bleeding Kansas, there you go. And there you go again. Now, in 1857, you have another thing that sets people up. A slave named Dred Scott sued for his freedom when he was taken into a free state. The Supreme Court actually ruled that slaves are property. Therefore, with them being property, much like whatever else other property you want to call it, they cannot sue in court. And the government cannot deprive a person of property without the due process of law. So the big thing here is they named slaves property. And if you want to know more about the Dred Scott decision, there you go.